Let's move into the abdomen for the vessels. And again, following arteries, we already know that we have the abdominal aorta, which came through the diaphragm at the T12 vertebral level. And at T12, that abdominal aorta sends out a series of branches. This plaque is a little bit misleading, as was the other. This looks like one structure coming out and branching into 4 branches. It is not. It is actually this vessel by itself, and then the other structure comes out and branches into 3 branches. This vessel coming up on the bottom of the diaphragm is known as the inferior phrenic artery. And there really should be 2 of those, one toward the right and one toward the left. Inferior phrenic artery. This other branch is known as the celiac trunk. The celiac trunk is a very large artery in diameter. It's almost big enough to put your little finger inside. However, it's very short. In most people, it's not much more than 1/4 to 1/2 inch long, and then it immediately divides into 3 branches, and we can see the branches here. 1, 2, and 3. One branch goes over to the liver. It is called the common hepatic artery. Another branch goes to the spleen. It is called the splenic artery. And the third branch goes out onto the upper part of the lesser curvature of the stomach. It is called the left gastric artery. So here we have the celiac trunk with its common hepatic, left gastric, and splenic branches. So although this looks like one with 4, this is an individual artery. This is the celiac trunk. All of that occurring at the T12 vertebral level. At the L1 vertebral level, we see a large vessel coming out of the abdominal aorta to supply viscera in the abdomen. This is called the superior mesenteric artery. The superior mesenteric artery is going to have branches that go to part of the stomach, the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, the ascending colon, and part of the transverse colon. So much of our abdominal viscera. That is at the L1 vertebral level. Also at the L1 vertebral level, we can see coming from the abdominal aorta, vessels leaving the aorta and going into the kidneys. These are the right and left renal arteries. Left renal artery, right renal artery. Notice that they are posterior to the renal veins. And on this side, it's very obvious, posterior to the inferior vena cava. We'll talk about that more in just a second. So at the L1 vertebral level, the superior mesenteric artery and the renal arteries. This plaque does not show at the L2 vertebral level the gonadal arteries, which we saw on the other plaque. However, at the L3 vertebral level, it does show the inferior mesenteric artery. The inferior mesenteric artery will supply part of the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the upper part of the rectum. Then at the L4 vertebral level, the abdominal aorta bifurcates, and we no longer have abdominal aorta. It bifurcates into the left and right common iliac arteries. Those in turn branch into the internal iliac arteries, which dive into the pelvis, and the external iliac arteries, which are going to head out into the lower extremities. So at L4, the abdominal aorta bifurcates into common iliac arteries, which will in turn bifurcate into internal and external iliac arteries. Also at L4, there is one artery that continues down into the pelvis called the middle sacral artery. Now on this model, they've shown it much larger than it should be. That would be our middle sacral artery. If we look in the abdomen, as we had an abdominal aorta bringing blood out, we have the inferior vena cava bringing blood back to the heart. The inferior vena cava was formed in the abdomen by the union of the common iliac veins. So we really should start at the foot and work our way back in. But let's start with our inferior vena cava inside the abdomen and look at the drainage of the abdominal viscera before we do the lower extremity. The inferior vena cava is going to pick up, at least on this plaque, the renal veins at the L1 vertebral level. Notice the left renal vein crossing anterior to the aorta, and the right renal vein coming directly into the inferior vena cava. At the renal hilum, those renal veins are the most anterior structures. Then this inferior vena cava simply passes by the liver and through the vena caval hiatus to the right atrium of the heart. As it's passing by the liver, it is going to pick up the hepatic vein, venous blood coming out of the liver into the inferior vena cava. Now on this particular vessel plaque, they painted them the same color. Makes the other plaque a little bit better. There are vessels that ultimately join to form what is called the hepatic portal vein. This is blood from our abdominal viscera into the liver. So draining the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the spleen. Here we can see the splenic vein coming over, and here we can see the vessels from the remaining abdominal viscera. They're going to unite and form what is called the hepatic portal vein. That hepatic portal vein is taking that venous blood into the liver, where the liver can detoxify the substance in the blood, do some glycogen, glucose transfer, things like that. So into the liver with hepatic portal vein, out of the liver with hepatic vein. So do not confuse those two. That is better seen on the other vessel plaque.